I never imagined that a simple evening walk could change the way I looked at myself, or at someone I thought I already knew. What happened that day still lingers in my heart, not because it was dramatic or loud, but because it was quiet, unexpectedly human. And in that quiet, something shifted between us. Before I tell you what happened, let me know in the comments. From which city are you watching this story? I always love hearing where these stories reach. It was one of those evenings when the air felt heavier than usual, though the sky itself looked perfectly calm. The sun had dipped low, brushing the horizon with strokes of orange and pink, the kind of colors you wish you could hold onto before they faded into the night. I had been restless all day, carrying the kind of thoughts you can't really name, but that weigh on you nonetheless. So I decided to do something simple. Put on my sneakers, tie my sweater around my shoulders, and go for a walk alone. There's a rhythm to walking by yourself. You start with your steps, then your breath falls into pattern, and soon your mind tries to keep up. That's exactly what I was hoping for, that somehow my feet would lead me into peace, even if my heart wasn't ready for it. I walked past the old maple tree at the corner of the street, past Mrs. Henderson's garden, where the hydrangeas were already starting to wilt, and I let the cool air sweep against my face. For a while, I felt exactly as I wanted to feel, alone but not lonely. That was when I heard footsteps behind me. At first I thought it was another neighbor heading in the same direction, but when I turned, there he was, Mark, the man who lived 3 houses down. He was in his late 50s, tall, with that calm presence that didn't demand attention but somehow always carried it. We'd spoken here and there, about the weather, about trash pickup days, about the occasional neighborhood barbecue, but nothing that lingered longer than a polite smile. "Out for some air too?" he asked, his voice carrying easily in the open space between us. I smiled, though I wasn't sure if I wanted company. Still, it felt rude to brush him off. Yes, just needed a walk to clear my head. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his tone careful, as though he knew he might be intruding. And in that small hesitation I sensed something, respect. He wasn't forcing his way in, he was offering. I nodded, surprised at myself for saying yes so quickly. Not at all. We fell into step together, his stride longer than mine, but he adjusted without making it obvious. The air between us was quiet at first, filled only by the sound of leaves rustling and the occasional distant bark of a dog. But then, almost naturally, he started talking about how he used to take these same walks with his wife before she passed away, how it felt both comforting and lonely to walk them again. I hadn't expected that. His voice softened when he said her name, and though I didn't know the full story, I felt a thread tug between us. Loss has a way of recognizing loss, even if the details are different. I shared a little too, not everything, but enough. I told him how the house sometimes felt too quiet now that my children were grown and living far away. How I sometimes turned on the TV just for the noise, but it never really filled the space the way laughter once did. We walked slower after that, as though neither of us wanted the road to run out too soon. The evening air grew cooler, brushing against the warmth of our words, and in the simplest way, something began to form, not romance. Not yet, but connection. The kind that makes you realize that being seen, truly seen, doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it's in the quiet, when 2 people who thought they were walking alone realize they don't have to. By the time we reached the end of the street, the sky was almost dark. He looked at me, not with pity, but with something steadier. "Thanks for letting me walk with you," he said. I felt the corners of my lips lift in a way they hadn't in a while. "No, thank you." It's been nice. Nice. Such a small word for something that had felt so unexpectedly healing. When we parted ways, I carried that quiet warmth with me, tucked into the stillness of my home. Didn't know it then, but that simple walk was the first step into something I hadn't realized I was ready for. Something that would continue, change me, and surprise me in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The next evening, the sky wore that after-rain brightness that makes everything look newly washed, the sidewalks darker than usual, the maple shining like it had been polished, the air cool and a little sweet. I told myself I was going out to clear my head again, but I won't pretend I didn't half hope I'd see him. It felt ridiculous, like a teenager waiting by the lockers, but there it was. The soft pull of wanting company and being surprised that I wanted it at all. I'd only made it to the corner when I heard his footsteps. Mark came toward me with that easy pace of his, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. He held up 2 paper cups. "Peace offering," he said, smiling. "Decaf chamomile with honey. You mentioned you can't do caffeine at night." I hadn't realized I'd said it out loud yesterday. Maybe I had. Maybe I wanted someone to remember. I took the cup, warmth slipping through the lid into my hands. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said. "That's why I wanted to." We walked the long way this time, past the trickle of water along the curve where the rain hadn't dried, past the shut windows glowing with evening lamplight. We didn't rush conversation. It happened the way breath falls into step. He asked about my day. I asked about his. He'd spent the afternoon fixing a squeaky hinge for the woman at the end of the block. "She pays in oatmeal cookies," he said. A hint of pride there, or maybe just contentment. "There's a path behind the elementary school that most people forget about. A ribbon of gravel past a little field and the community garden." When we reached it, he paused. "Do you mind if we cut through?" His voice softened in a way I was beginning to recognize. I haven't walked there with anyone in a long time. I understood before he said why. The garden was a patchwork of rectangles bordered by soft wooden boards, some plots trimmed neat as a barber shop, others wild with late-season herbs. The rain had coaxed the smell of earth up into the air. On the far side, a plain wooden bench looked out toward a thin row of birches. A small brass plate was set into the back slat. I didn't need to read it to know what it said, but I did anyway. Grace. 2018. He sat first, leaving space between us like a gentleman at a bus stop. I followed, the wood cool beneath my palms. For a few seconds we only listened, to the distant thud of a basketball, to a bird stitching a line of sound somewhere above us. She loved this place, he said, eyes on the birches. Not just the plants. The idea that things come back. That you put something in the ground and you don't see it for a while, but it's working even when you can't tell. I thought of how many times I'd come home, turned on the TV for noise, and told myself I was fine. I thought of the spaces in my house where pictures used to hang, of a hallway that suddenly felt too long after my kids left. "It's a comforting idea," I said, "that something's happening beneath the surface." He nodded. For a long time after she died, I kept walking, but I wouldn't sit here. Felt like betraying her to sit and not talk to her. But I've been thinking lately, maybe the gift of a bench is that someone else can rest on it too. I let his words settle. There was no rush to fill the silence. The breeze slipped across my cheek, and I realized I hadn't felt lonely since we'd started walking. That surprised me, not the absence of loneliness, but the lack of guilt about the absence. I looked at the small brass plate again, and then at him. "Thank you for bringing me," I said. "I don't take it lightly." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out 2 paper packets, the kind seeds come in, worn soft at the edges. "I have a habit," he said, half sheepish. "Every fall I write a hope on a seed packet tuck it in the garden box, and plant it in spring. It's silly, maybe, but it helps. He handed me one and a small pencil, the kind teachers used to keep in jars. The packet was labeled Marigold, though the picture had almost rubbed away. "You don't have to tell me what you write," he added. "It's yours." I sat with the little rectangle of paper warming in my palm. A hope. It felt so much braver than a wish, like it had a job to do. I thought about what I wanted but was afraid to name. Not fireworks, not drama, just room. Room for conversation that didn't require explaining myself from the beginning every time. Room for laughter to return like a familiar song. I bent and wrote slowly, the pencil faint but steady. Let the quiet become a place where joy can grow. "May I read it?" he asked, then quickly shook his head. "No," I promised. "You don't have to share." I surprised myself. "You can," I said, "if you want." He read the line aloud, soft as a prayer. "That's beautiful." He slid his own packet back into his pocket without reading it to me, and I didn't ask. The respect went both ways, and that felt right. We tucked my packet under the lip of the nearest garden box, where the soil was dark and damp and smelled like rain. His hand brushed mine as we let go. Neither of us moved for a heartbeat. He cleared his throat, almost embarrassed by his own tenderness. "I know we're just walking," he said, eyes still on our hands, "but if at any point you'd rather be alone, please tell me. I'd never want to make you uncomfortable." It was the question I didn't know I needed. "I'll tell you," I said, "and I'll expect the same from you." Deal. On the way back, the path seemed shorter. Maybe it was the chamomile, or the relieved muscles, or the way a shared story can make the air feel warmer. When we reached my house, I noticed the porch light flicker and die. I laughed, because of course it would choose that moment. "It's been doing that for a week," I said. "I keep forgetting to get a new bulb." He looked at the fixture, then back at me. "If you'd like, I could come by tomorrow and change it. Or not. I can just bring a bulb and hand it to you over the fence like a spy." The picture of him passing a light bulb like contraband made me smile. "Would you?" "Tomorrow afternoon is fine, but only if it's no trouble." "It's not," he said, and I believed him. He took a small step back, as if to give me my yard, my threshold, my choice. "May I do something a little old-fashioned?" he asked. "I want to say goodnight properly." He didn't move closer. He simply lifted his hand, palm up, an invitation, and not a demand. I placed my hand in his, surprised by the steadiness in my chest. He gave the gentlest squeeze and then let go. "Good night," he said. "Good night, Mark." Inside, the house felt different. The same furniture, the same rug with its fraying edge, the same quiet, but the silence had softened. I set the empty cup in the sink and stood there a moment, palms flat against the cool porcelain, remembering the bench, the seed packet, the respect in his question. The surprise of the evening wasn't a confession or a dramatic turn. It was the way dignity can live alongside hope. It was the realization that walking with someone doesn't erase the person you were before. It simply steadies your steps. In bed, I listened to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the pulsing of my own heart, even in calm. Tomorrow there would be a porch light to fix and a new path to walk. I don't know if I drifted off smiling, but I do know I woke twice during the night with the sense of being held, not by arms, but by the possibility that something kind could grow in a garden I thought was done for the season. The next day slipped into its routine with barely a ripple, laundry folded, dishes put away, the ordinary rhythm that usually felt like both a comfort and a cage. I almost convinced myself that the evening walk with Mark had been more dream than reality, that the seed packet and the soft pressure of his hand belonged to some imagined story I told myself. But when the doorbell rang late in the afternoon, there he was, standing on my porch with a small box of bulbs in his hand, and that calm, steady smile. "Operation Porch Light," he said lightly, holding up the box like a prize. I laughed before I even realized I was doing it. It had been a while since someone had shown up at my door with something so simple and yet so thoughtful. He made quick work of the light fixture, stretching up on the step stool I pulled from the garage. The new bulb flickered once and then glowed steady, pouring a warm circle over the doorway. "Better," he said, brushing his hands together. "You deserve to come home to light." It was such a small thing, but it lodged in me. How often had I walked into shadows without noticing? How long had I let the dark greet me as though it was my only company? We sat on the porch for a while afterward, just two neighbors with glasses of iced tea. The cicadas had begun their late summer chorus, that endless hum filling the pauses between our words. I asked him about his garden. He asked me about the books on the little table beside my armchair. We talked about nothing earth-shattering, and yet every word felt like it carried a weight. At one point, a group of children ran past, chasing each other with plastic swords. Their laughter was loud, piercing through the air like bells. I watched them and felt that ache again, the one of time already gone, of little feet that no longer thudded through my hallway. He must have noticed, because he said softly, "The hardest part isn't missing the noise. It's convincing yourself the silence isn't punishment." I turned to look at him then, and the honesty in his expression nearly undid me. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. And in that moment, the space between us felt smaller than ever. We didn't linger long. The evening cooled quickly, and I didn't want to keep him. When he stood to leave, he rested one hand on the porch railing. "I'll see you on the walk tonight, if you're up for it." I nodded. "I'll be there." And I knew I would be, not out of politeness or habit, but because the thought of walking alone again suddenly felt unnecessary. Not wrong, but less. That night, as I tied my sweater around my shoulders and stepped into the dusk, the street seemed different. Familiar, yes, but no longer mine alone. The sound of footsteps joined mine before long, steady and sure, and for the first time in a while, I didn't feel like I was searching for something I couldn't name. I was already finding it. The days that followed seemed to slip into a rhythm I hadn't expected. Evening walks became something almost natural, like brushing my teeth before bed, or opening the window to let in cool air. Each time, I told myself it was just coincidence, just two neighbors enjoying the same path, but deep down I knew better. Something had been planted between us, and it was growing quietly, like the seeds tucked away in that community garden. One evening, the air was heavy with the smell of cut grass. The sun hung low, stretched thin like a golden thread across the rooftops. I waited on my porch a few minutes longer than usual, wondering if he'd come by when I saw him approaching. No words at first, just a smile, the kind that doesn't need an explanation. We walked the familiar loop past the maple, past the corner fence with its drooping roses. Our conversation was easy, full of small things that somehow felt bigger than they were. A recipe I'd tried that flopped, a radio show he'd listened to on his drive, the stubborn squirrel that kept stealing tomatoes from his garden. Nothing dramatic, but each word laid another brick in the bridge between us. When we reached the bench again, the one with Grace's name, we sat without asking. This time he didn't keep as much distance. Not close enough to crowd me, just close enough that I could feel his presence without looking. For a long while, we didn't speak at all. The sky shifted colors above us, and the first stars began to blink awake. Finally, he said, I used to think the best years of my life had already been spent, that everything after was just waiting. He paused, searching for words. But these walks, they've reminded me that maybe we're never really finished. Maybe there's more to be found, even if it's quieter, gentler. I felt the weight of his words. I thought about my own empty hallways, the way silence had sometimes felt like punishment, just as he had said. But now, walking beside him, sitting here in this small pocket of peace, silence felt like something else, like possibility. I turned to him, the cool air brushing my cheek. "I know what you mean," I said softly. "I thought I'd closed that door a long time ago. But maybe it was never locked. Maybe I just forgot to open it again." He looked at me then, and in his eyes I didn't see pity or longing or even loneliness. I saw companionship, understanding, respect. It was enough to make me feel steadier than I had in years. When it was time to go, we walked back slowly. At my porch, under the new light he'd installed, he stopped. His voice was gentle. "I don't want to rush this or put a name on it before you're ready. But I'd like to keep walking with you, if you'll let me." The simplicity of it caught me. Not a promise of forever, not a grand declaration, just an invitation to keep going, one step at a time. I smiled, the kind of smile that felt like it came from deep inside. "Yes," I said. "I'd like that too." He touched my hand, briefly, then let it go. And as he walked away down the street, I realized that sometimes life's biggest surprises aren't sudden or dramatic. Sometimes they come in the quiet, the steady rhythm of footsteps beside your own, the glow of a porch light that finally works, the knowledge that you're not as alone as you thought. That night, I sat by the window, looking out at the dark street where his figure had disappeared. I thought about seeds and gardens and how hope doesn't vanish when seasons change. It waits, patient and stubborn, for the right moment to break through the soil. And maybe, just maybe, this was mine.